we're going to go ahead and talk about slow flight real quick. This is another maneuver on the ACS. You'll have to demonstrate it on your test. It's also just good practice. I always run slow flight on flight reviews with people after they have their license. It's just good stick and rudder skills. It gets you warmed up. This is the whole docking the boat feeling where not much airflow is going over your control surfaces, so the deflection of your control surfaces is not as effective as it would be if you're going fast. Yeah, when we're going fast, it's easy to fly. Slow flight is the most tedious portion. It prepares us for where else are we flying really slow but not trying to stall? Well, coming into land. So you need to know it, and it's a good maneuver to practice, and we'll go over it here. So first thing, the ace check, altitude. You need to be able to complete this whole maneuver above 1500 AGL. When you get to practice these solo, I'd suggest even going up higher. You don't need to be right at 1500. That's just the bottom. So in case a stall would happen, you have plenty of room to recover. So think a little bit higher on this. Clearing turns, obviously clear the area, look for traffic, check your engine real quick, and if everything's good to go, you're ready to start. So how I start slow flight is after we've done those checks, we have initial power reduction. I teach just like in the pattern in these 172s, go to 1500 RPM. And usually when we're down low at something like that, below the green arc in the tack, we're gonna put on the carb heat. And as we are throttling back to there, what happens, I'll see if my little airplane, if this will be doable. So as we throttle back to 1500, you're gonna lose your thrust component. Gravity didn't change, so what happens is when we lose thrust, we start to lose some altitude if we don't compensate for that. So as we throttle back, what we have to do is increase elevator pressure. So we slowly start tipping the nose up, and when we're in the wide arc, we can put all of our flaps in, and then we will have max lift. And what happens is you transition is you smoothly throttle back, you start bringing the nose up, and you're gonna find kind of a sweet spot where you actually put the power back in. The nose will usually be just above the horizon, and you try to fly at a minimum controllable airspeed. So that doesn't mean you have to hear the stall horn, but the stall warning horn is it's in front of the stall. So if you hear the stall horn, just know you're close to a stall and note your speed. A lot of times in the past, I've had students listen for it. When they see that, note the speed, kind of use that as a benchmark or to fly just above that speed. But what we're doing now, once we have flaps in, we are trying to maintain that airspeed that we just discovered, which was minimum controllable. And if we're going faster, that means that our nose was down too low, so we pitch up. And if we're going too slow, like say we hear that stall horn blaring and that extra high pitch like the Cessna stall horns get, you're real close. Well, how do we compensate to get it back to the speed that we were trying to maintain? Well, you lower the nose. So you pitch for speed, and if you lose altitude, use your throttle input to raise it or lower it. When you have 30 degrees of flaps or 40 degrees of flaps in there, that's a lot of drag. It provides a fair amount of lift. The only problem is it provides proportionally probably more drag than what you're used to with 10 or 20 degrees compared to the lift. So be assertive with the power. I always tell people this, if you see your altitude start slipping, if you just barely creep in the power with full flaps, you're gonna keep on sinking. So when you see the altitude moving, give it enough power to stop it. Remember, if we're at 1500, like I wrote out before, we got a lot of power that we could advance in there to compensate for that loss of lift, or as we're losing altitude, I should say. So be assertive with it. Sometimes with full flaps, you might even be, cruise power settings to maintain altitude, and that's just what it takes. There's nothing that specifies in this maneuver you can only use so much power. So all the power is available. The other thing to remember is we have carburetor heat on when we're below the green arc. When you are in the green arc, you can always take that carburetor heat away. That's going to bump up the RPMs as well to give you a little more power to work with. Lastly, if you're flying slow and the nose is up in the air, we're gonna make you do turns in this setting too. So if we turn, the more bank angle we have, the higher our stall speeds go. The goal is not to stall in this maneuver. So when we're turning in slow flight, we're gonna keep it always very shallow while we're in there. A good rule of thumb that I have learned and taught is that we're gonna use that turn coordinator instrument, and we are gonna never do more than standard rate turn. That's gonna keep you pretty shallow on the bank. So make sure you're keeping it shallow. The other thing is, I said docking the boat earlier, if you've got any boating experience or any kind of water, you're moving through a fluid, you know that when you're going slow, it takes quite a bit of movement, and it's kind of almost sloppy, like it doesn't respond to your movements as quickly. So when you're rolling up on a heading, make sure you start rolling out of it early. If you wait till the last moment, you'll fly right on by that heading, and you'll be chasing it back and forth. So the ACS says you've got to maintain altitude within 100 feet for private pilot. You got to maintain heading within 10 degrees, and minimum controllable airspeed, it's really -0, meaning no stalls, plus 10. So yeah, if you go down to slow flight and you get down to like 50 knots or 45 knots even, if all of a sudden you're doing 65 knots with that same setting, you're probably not in slow flight anymore. You're not practicing what we're doing the maneuver for. So your instructor will go over this too, but you can use this video to review. Lastly, when you're getting out of slow flight, so we have full flaps, when you're going back to cruise, you're gonna have to give it full throttle so that we don't lose altitude as we're coming out of it, and bring the flaps up in increments. We're never gonna go from full flaps to no flaps really quickly, because that would cause us to lose a lot of lift, which would cause us to sink, which would get us out of the ACS tolerances. I'd say common errors would be that you stare too much at the instruments trying to maintain that airspeed. So really get a good pitch established out the window. If you do that, that'll help you cover your the requirements for your airspeed, your altitude, and your heading. So other things are people turn too steeply, and when they turn too steeply, it gets a little gnarly whenever then you end up overcorrecting, and then you can't hold headings, and it's a lot out of control. So it's a slow slow maneuver, meant to be that way, so that when you come into land later on, you have felt what it feels like to be close to the stall without stalling. So have fun doing slow flight.